So that's pretty hilarious. But this video is all over the show because it started in the Queensland desert. Then I was on an adventure bike trip in far north Queensland. And I was going to do some video at Port Douglas, but then I decided to do it at the Red Arrow in Cairns. And as you'll see in a few minutes, Cairns is unseasonably hot and humid at the moment. And I'm walking the Red Arrow, which is a very kind of steep rainforest walk, and I'm wearing a leather motorbike jacket, carrying the motorbike helmet, and I'm just sweating absolute buckets, which you'll see in the video. And then, of course, the problem was it was so hot, the camera was switching itself off, and sometimes it switched off when I didn't realise, and I lost a whole lot of this stuff I was talking about at the start. So now I'm back home, and I'm back down at Fingal Beach, watching the sunset. It's just very windy, so I'll try and make this short because the wind might interrupt the sound. I actually tried to do it at the, talk about it on the Cairns Esplanade this morning. At sunrise. The good thing to see, because that is a lovely walk, the good thing to see was that it was very crowded. There were so many people up running and walking at sunrise, which was inspiring. Nice to see the message getting out there about the importance of the circadian rhythm and setting the central clock and the suprachiasmatic nucleus of the hypothalamus that we talked about. So I was too busy to do the filming, so here am I, now back at Fingal Head in northern New South Wales, watching the sun go down with just some wind. So I've never really spoken why I'm so interested in mitochondrial health and brain regeneration, recovery from illness. It's because my grandfather, at the age of 37, was a New Zealand engineer visiting London. And in the late 30s, as an engineer, the world was a very different place to how it is now. And turns out that war was starting. And there was 400,000 British and French army members, soldiers, on the beach at Dunkirk. And the British government decided that they couldn't send the British Navy to rescue them. We all know this story. And it was kind of put in very inspiring words in the movie Dunkirk, where they said, when you can't get home, home will come and get you. And my grandfather was one of the men who volunteered for the civilian boats to cross the channel and go to Dunkirk and help pick up the stranded soldiers who were otherwise going to be either killed or imprisoned for the rest of the war. And I'm very proud of that. The only real memory I have of my grandfather is him being in a small home in Christchurch in New Zealand, where sitting in his lazy boy chair wearing a brown cardigan, navy tattoos all over his arms. By this stage he had severe Alzheimer's disease, and would just sit in the lazy boy chair the whole day, dribbling. And and then my father was in the army and served in Malaysia during the Malaysian emergency. And he came back from that a profoundly different man, which affected our family. And again, at the end of his life, he had Alzheimer's disease. And he died not recognising everybody, including me, when he died in my arms in a nursing home. My brother was in the military. He had died after getting severe post-traumatic stress disorder. I haven't spoken about that before, and I'm not ready to really speak about that in detail because it's still very recent and very painful for me. But seeing those proud men who sacrificed so much so afflicted by a degenerative brain disease that robbed them of the last years of their life. It's going to be very motivating for me to try and work out why it all happens and what the rest of us can do to try and prevent it. And don't give up on the quantum physics, because if I can understand it, you can understand it. Because the secret is, I'm not that smart. I am, however, quite determined. And, well, that's my big strength, my determination, my never giving up. Which means I have to try and break things down into simple paradigms so I can understand them. It's starting to rain. And in fact, I've got an interesting story about that, because 1989 I was playing semi-professional basketball in New Zealand, and I had a bit of a banner year. Had a couple of 36-point games against very good competition, and actually got initially invited to play in the All-Star game, and then later on got invited to try out at the trials for the national team, the Tall Blacks. And Keith Meir was the coach at the time running the trials, and we got halfway through the trials and then he stopped all the games and he got everybody together in the huddle, and he pointed at me and said, look, this guy can't run, he can't jump, he can't shoot, but he's completely dominating these trials. And how is he doing that? He's doing it through sheer determination, because he's the first guy down the court, he's the first guy on defense, and he's doing that with sheer determination. And I'm kind of really proud, even though it's kind of insulting, I'm kind of really proud of it. So let's talk a little bit about quantum physics and how they relate to mitochondria. Because interestingly, mitochondria, which according to science developed about 2.5 billion years ago when one bacteria consumed another bacteria, and one of those bacteria became a mitochondria, which then separated us off into bacteria, which have been around for 3.5 billion years according to science, and everything else, which was plants, fungi, and animals, because of the development of that mitochondria. Now, interestingly, that means mitochondria have been around for several billion years, but mitochondria use quantum physics for their electron flow and a lot of their function. Now, we're just starting to do quantum computing now, but it's so complicated that the computers aren't in real use yet, because they're very sensitive to noise and they require very cold environments to work properly. Now, the two big quantum physics subjects that are involved in the mitochondria are quantum tunneling and quantum entanglement, which mitochondria have been using for billions of years, bacteria have been using for billions of years, but we can't yet deploy them properly in computers. Now again, that's a very rough understanding because I'm no expert at quantum physics, but the two that really are relevant to mitochondrial function and mitochondria use to produce the ATP that we run on for energy are quantum tunneling and quantum entanglement. So what's quantum tunneling? Well, that's where a quantum particle, which is a very small particle like an electron, can exist both as a particle and a waveform. And what that does is it allows that very small particle to pass through solid matter. So the easiest way to think about it is a train. And for the train to get through to it can't go through a hill unless there's a tunnel. And quantum physics allows electrons to pass through solid material, which means they can pass along the respiratory proteins on the inner mitochondrial membrane fast enough to create energy. And they use quantum tunneling to do that. So it'll be a little bit more sophisticated tunnel than this one. But the train gets through the tunnel, which probably looks a lot more like this one. And then my good friend Byron Vaitoe, who's perhaps the most gifted athlete I ever got to play with, he'll also show us how quantum tunneling works, because just imagine that you're bouncing a basketball on a court, and the ball bounces back. But quantum tunneling allows the basketball, which is now a quantum particle, to pass through the floor of the court by tunneling through the floor of the court. So the train gets through the hill going through a quantum tunnel, and the basketball gets through the floor of the court going through a quantum tunnel. And that's how electrons move through the respiratory proteins in the inner mitochondrial membrane fast enough to create the energy that we do. The other thing that mitochondria use quantum physics for is quantum entanglement. The easiest way to think about quantum entanglement is imagining one of those giant schools of fish where thousands of them move together as one, seemingly effortlessly. And again, that's how electrons move through the along the inner mitochondrial membrane in large groups but acting as one. So I just find it fascinating that bacteria, which have been around for billions of years, are using quantum physics that we're now only beginning just to understand and be able to utilize ourselves. And I just find it hard to believe sometimes that all just came together by accident in a primordial soup billions of years ago. As they say, it's a bit like finding a Rolex watch on the sidewalk that just spontaneously came together. But anyway, I don't have any answers. I just like thinking about it. But it's kind of changed my focus in life a lot. Right, before we continue, let's do a quick classroom summary of a couple of key concepts. First one is the mitochondria, which we've got 1 quadrillion in our body. They live inside our nuclei and they're thought to be derived billion years ago from one bacteria internalizing another bacteria. We're going to have a look at that over time and see what we think about that, because there are some questions about that, especially considering that these organisms or these intracellular organelles, billion years old, use basically quantum computing techniques to perform their function. So quantum computing techniques, billions of years old, interesting. So essentially what they do is they take thyroid hormone, well they don't, they use thyroid hormone and B vitamins to shuttle food, which is converted into electrons, that's another story, into the mitochondria. So food becomes electrons with the use of thyroid hormone, B vitamins. They go into the mitochondria, of which we have 1 quadrillion in our body, inside our cells. The mitochondria has an outer membrane, an internal membrane, and in that internal membrane, which we're going to have a much closer look at the moment, there are 5 respiratory proteins, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which shuttle electrons along the inner mitochondrial membrane. As they do, they pump hydrogens out and then hydrogens burst back through. We're going to have a closer look at that in a second. And as we've discussed before, what do mitochondria produce by doing that process? They produce light, which is known as biophotons. They produce heat, which is why Greg gets in cold water and heats his mitochondria up to 50 degrees to give them some exercise. They produce ATP, which is our energy currency of the body, which is essentially transforming energy of food into energy of electrons, which we then pass on and use electrons for our energy in the form of ATP. They produce water and they produce pollution known as free radicals. Okay, let's zoom in and have a closer look at this process. Right, so now we've zoomed in on the inner mitochondrial membrane where we've got the 5 respiratory proteins which are shuttling electrons along that inner mitochondrial membrane. We've got cytochrome 1, cytochrome 2, cytochrome 3, which is known as cytochrome C reductase, cytochrome 4, which is known as cytochrome C oxidase, and we've got cytochrome 5, which is known as ATP synthase, which is a final respiratory protein. So electrons are transported along this membrane. As they pass along this membrane through the cytochrome enzymes, they are pumping hydrogen molecules from the mitochondrial matrix across the membrane into the intermembranous space. Cytochrome C is a protein here which helps accelerate the transfer of electrons from 3 to 4 and then ultimately to ATPase. And remember, ATPase spins at 9,000 cycles per second, and as it does, what makes it spin? As these hydrogen molecules are pumped into the intermembrane space, eventually the pressure builds up so much that they burst back through. As they do, they spin that nanomotor 9,000 times per second, and that converts ADP to ATP, which is our energy currency, by adding a phosphate to ADP. So you get 3 phosphates on ATP. Now, interestingly, what happens though is as you use the electrons to move along here, which is pumping the hydrogen out to eventually burst back through, the electrons are released onto oxygen. And that's where you develop these unstable oxygen molecules, otherwise known as free radicals, where you've got an extra electron on the oxygen. And we're going to talk about that later because that becomes very significant. We're also going to talk about how we can speed up flow through here, or how we can slightly delay, or what delays that spinning of the ATPase, or what slows the movement of electrons, or what speeds up the movement of the electrons through here, because that also becomes very relevant as how we can alter our mitochondrial function. Right, finally we've zoomed in even more now, and now we can see a very simplified version of what the process is. We're passing electrons along the inner mitochondrial membrane to produce ATP. We can also take a side road which converts to free radicals, otherwise the electron is added to a stable oxygen molecule to become an unstable molecule. So just imagine this is the All Blacks and they're passing the rugby ball along the back line. They want to get the rugby ball out as quickly as possible to the speedsters on the wing. They want to get it to Christian Cullen, they want to get it to Jonah Lomu out there. Unfortunately, occasionally, they might drop the ball, and that ball, instead of going out to speedsters on the wing, goes this direction and goes to the opposition, which that electron then goes to the oxygen molecule, which makes an unstable molecule, which is called a free radical. Now, we do actually use free radicals in the body because they're part of our immune system to destroy things. But we really want to get a really good balance between these two of energy production and using ammunition for our immune system to kill foreign invaders. So we want to get as much as possible going on here, going over here as we need it. And we now know, the body uses light interacting with the mitochondria to alter this process. Red light and near infrared light increases the movement of electrons along the inner mitochondrial membrane to produce ATP. Blue light increases the movement of electrons to free radicals, which is why blue light can be used in infections. Whereas if we want energy, we want more going with ATP. And we're going to talk about that with the rest of the video, about how red light increases the electron flow to ATP and blue light increases the electron flow to the free radicals and slows the movement to ATP. Quick liver cleanse, juice and coconut water to start this week's video. You'll see why in a second. It's definitely too hot for the phone, it keeps switching itself off. So, where was I? Not medical or health advice. I remained suspended for nearly 6 years in nutritional environmental medicine. I'm only permitted to work as a emergency specialist in a public hospital. So none of this advice. And it certainly does not, with a capital N-O, take the place of professional advice you get from your own health practitioner, whom, with a couple of WHO, you should seek out if you have any questions about anything I say today. But I will, at the end of the video, link the references and screenshot some of the articles I've got this information from. Okay, the first clinical study I want to talk about is the effect of light on fungus, particularly Candida, our old friend Candida, which is an old topic of interest of mine, because I don't talk about it much anymore, but that was one of the causes of me first getting sick back in the early 2000s. Mould was a big part of my illness, and Candida parasites, which got my interest in nutritional medicine started. Then went on to do a 5-year fellowship training program in nutritional environmental medicine. Alright, so Candida and light. Okay, so light comes in various wavelengths, ranges from about 400 nanometers to 800 nanometers. That's visible light. That's a wavelength, which is the distance between the peaks of the wave and the waveform. And it starts with blue light at the very bottom, then goes through various colours, particularly green and then yellow, and finishes at red, which is at about 800 nanometers, then moves on to near infrared and far infrared. Now the study with Candida, now the other thing to remember about fungus, it has mitochondria. Now its cells are very similar to our cells, which is why we don't have many effective antifungal medications, because if it can kill the fungus cell, it can also kill our cells. But the mitochondria of the fungal cell is slightly different to our mitochondria, so started new research on how targeting the fungal mitochondria might make up for a more, not effective, but more side effect free antifungal agent. So the Candida cell has 3 primary characteristics. One, it has hyphae. Hyphae are its arms and legs it uses to spread out to collect nutrients, but in doing so it kind of melts other cells it comes into contact with and destroys them and sucks up their nutrients. That's the fungal hyphae, like giant tentacles. Then there's the mycotoxins that Candida have now been shown to produce. They are the fungal poisons which they use to kill other cells with. And thirdly, they have a biofilm. Now, a biofilm is a layer of snotty mucus where that groups of microbes cover themselves in. It's a bit like that quantum entanglement where that school of fish might cover itself in a layer of mucus to protect itself. Well, these Candida cells get surrounded by this mucus layer to protect it from attack from antimicrobials, both natural, our innate immune system, and herbs or medications. So what we've found though is red and near infrared light is both effective at dissolving the biofilm. So now you've got rid of the protective wrapping around the Candida, making them much more susceptible to attack. And the red and near infrared light has also been shown to damage the hyphae. So now you're taking away the feeding arms of the fungus, starving it to death. And also, interestingly, in some studies, it shows that some of the mycotoxins are also susceptible to attack by the red and near infrared light. So certainly with Candida, you're getting a triple threat from red and near infrared light of dissolving hyphae, destroying mycotoxins, or neutralizing mycotoxins and destroying biofilms. The second study was on light and adipose tissue, which is what many of us have got around our abdomens that we're trying to get rid of. So the experiment was using red, green and blue light on adipose tissue. Found that the red and near infrared light worked on the adipose tissue and increased the human adipose derived stem cells, and also increased ATP production from the mitochondria present in the fat. So increased stem cells, free stem cell production by red and infrared light. Now interestingly, when they used blue light on the adipose tissue, it decreased stem cells, and it also increased the amount of reactive oxygen species, the free radicals that we talked about previously, and also increased intracellular calcium levels, which you don't want because calcium building up in the mitochondria inhibit their function. In fact, that's a big part of how magnesium works, because magnesium is the body's natural calcium antagonist, which removes calcium from cells and returns them to the bone. So blue light on adipose tissue increases your intracellular calcium levels, whereas magnesium will decrease it. So you don't want to get exposed to a lot of blue light, except natural blue light, which is high at midday, when it's also mixed with appropriate levels of red and infrared light as well to counteract its effect. Okay, so, and the second study was, albeit a rat study, but it was looking at the use of light in recovery from stroke in rats. And what they found was that if they exposed the area of the brain, cranium of the rats, to red and near infrared light, the size of the stroke, this was immediately after the stroke, the size of the stroke reduced, the ATP of the repair cells increased, and inflammation went down. So you've got less stroke size, you've got a better, more healing microenvironment, you've got decreased inflammation, you've got increased ATP to fuel the recovery. So in summary, red, near infrared light, very effective immediately post-stroke in reducing the damage, improving the microenvironment recovery, increasing the energy of the healing cells. All right, that's the 3 studies, references in the YouTube and screenshots throughout the video. Right, that's it for me. And always remember, just as the Navy SEALs say, no matter how much it hurts, how dark it gets, or how far you fall, you are never out of the fight. And why have I started making these videos again? Because I chose you forever, no matter what. And I'm not going to give up either. So if you got something out of the video, I'd be honoured if you hit the like button. Just lets YouTube know that people are interested in this information and gets the information a bit more out of there. And with much peace and love, I'll see you next week. Bye. Look what just popped up on the beach while I was walking. Talk about a great example of light and wavelengths. You can see the blue, green, yellow, red pretty clearly there, all different wavelengths, and a lot of red because it's what a great tutorial Mother Nature, God put on for us. What a fantastic tutorial on light wavelengths. You can see the blue, green, yellow, red, and lots of red this time of night. It's just sensational. Oh, good news is I think I've finished in time to head to Crystal Cascade before I have to have the bike back, get a swim in one of my favourite waterfalls. Bye. Right, no guarded update this week because I'm up in far north Queensland in Cairns at Rusty's Markets. I'm going to pick up a couple of my favourite fruits, one being pomegranate, which we'll talk about during the video rather than now because a lot of people are around, and dragon fruit, which my favourite is the purple one, and of course Longmans I also like, but mangosteen are a favourite. I'll talk about it during the video how you can also use the peel of both the pomegranate and the mangosteen.